story that was originally published in Litro called Sostenuto. And it was also chosen by Rilla Askew to be in the Best Small Fictions anthology, along with some other people's writing that's been in the Best Small Fictions anthologies as well. And this story is about a piano player. Sostenuto. There was this section of Dvorak's Symphony No. 9 he could play, a little piano riff from the Largo movement he'd kick out when he thought about that woman he knew he shouldn't think about at his real job. He feared there he might hurt someone, hurt something, might lose his job for being distracted, messing up. But here, long after all happy hour suits left, when the regulars were keeping their heads down, when Cubby was counting money and glasses and filling coaster holders, and right before last call, he played it. It felt right then. It felt like a Crown Royal rim licked wet. They had met in the hallway of this place when he was much younger and she was broken. A waft of warm whiskey, she fell onto him like sound itself, continued to strike him for 3 months like a felt hammer, soft and hard. She was both strings and percussion. He knew he didn't love her. He loved his wife, the woman having daughter after daughter, the woman filled with milk and kindness, open eyes and smile, his soft petal, his una corda. But lately, and for some time now, he's considered it may have been the only time he really felt love. What he lived before and after her with his wife and daughters was commitment, a completely different petal, different effect, different sound altogether. Love with this woman he met in the hallway offered more octaves, hidden extra keys below hinged lids. Since those nights when this woman taught him about another place where sorrow was sharp and laughter was insanely regular, and movement between emotions so quick and surprising it left him spent, he had to learn to shift back to his life, his place, his contract with level responsibility. And with this move, he'd grown closed and heavy, burdened with life, a home full of girls who became women, wives, mothers, and then slowly and quickly left him. His wife fretted over the dotted harlequin bugs on their cauliflower plants, the hairline faults of their plastered ceilings, so he scraped off the black and white eggs lined up like little keys on the undersides of leaves. He spackled. But he allowed a small spot for this woman he'd met in the hallway. It was just that lately the memory of her broke through that place, where it was tucked safely in his head. She poured out of him somewhere above his ear, left a gaping hole there his wife was sure to notice again. He was becoming reckless with despair, restoring jacks and hammers, caps and screws. These broken pianos reminded him too often of her, this unsteady, steady woman who made him liquid and tender. His wife's name drew him in first. Her father, his instructor, mentioned her one day as he practiced Chopin's Preludes No. 7, A major. Octava was 19, he was 21. After their first date, tickets her father could not use to the symphony, they played chopsticks, her fingers stumbling over the keys, the side of her arm barely brushing the side of his. "She'll be your metronome," her father had said, toasting them at their wedding. Just a few weeks into it with this woman in the hallway, his wife found out. She said she understood, said she'd allow him to leave her if that's what he needed. But he stayed, left piano playing at that bar every night, and took on 2 jobs, one tuning and repairing uprights and grands, and one cleaning long hallways of the music hall with a mop and rolling bucket of gray water. He made enough money to take good care of his wife, his girls, and still played just 1 night a month, only for tips. She allowed him this, reluctantly. And so, once a month, he remembers when he fell in love, when he just played piano. And the woman? She sweats his drink, slides beside wispy sheets of music, waves around his head, a sound riding on perpetual sustain. And when he's done, when he's had enough, he walks home, unlocks the door, and finds his way back to his bed, his wife, and lays open this spot on his head on the pillow. Thank you. when I was reading everyone else's work and I was looking at what Naz does, I was thinking of how other art forms really, really support our art. And for me, this story came from a painting by Willem Sosnal, who is a Polish painter. And it was showing at the Carnegie Museum of Art. And it's just this painting of this man with his back to us, and he's wearing this old ratty t-shirt. He's playing the piano. It looks like he has bourbon sitting up on the piano. He has this hole in his head that almost looks like it was opened up by a bullet that was shot. And that haunting hole there, I wondered what was in his brain that keeps leaking out that he wants to keep protected. And that's where that story came from. So as you're listening to everyone's work, I think that that's the thing that means the most to me as artists. We're really trying our best to talk and speak to other forms of art when we're working in our own form. And just so excited to hear what you guys are going to be reading. So.
Well, it's actually a wonderful introduction from what I'm reading. I have this collaborative work called Memories in the Park, and it was prompted by Kamala Aisha Moon's poem. And unfortunately, Moon died during COVID. She has a couple of collections, and she's just amazing. But the reason why I selected this is because it's a successful collaboration between Paul Beckman, me, Audra Kerr Brown, Gay Degani, Hillary Leftwich, Jane Elman Stout, and Ann Weisgerber and Nan Wigington. This was the writing group that Jolene and I were a part of and how we met.
Yeah, the fish tank.
The fish tank. So this was, and I don't know why, I think you were busy or whatever, but you couldn't do it. Yeah. And I had it in my head that you did, but then I was like, oh, she didn't.
And Linda did.
Yeah, Heather did Linda. But what I really love about this is our voices are indistinguishable. I don't even remember which lines are mine. And so, oh yeah, we were runner-up in a contest with this. Maybe we should have won. Memories in the Park. I remember the day when Mama swung across the river on a rope tied to the branch of the swamp oak. I saw her pleasure naked. I saw sky upon cloth upon skin. She was the arrow of human ambition arcing across the sun, and her stretched legs pointed to Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune. She pulled the rope and walked it back as far as possible, snapped it a few times, and pulled on it to ensure it would hold her as she glided across the river from hill to hill with her Heidi Klum backpack and to deliver my forgotten lunch. Mama wanted me to swing over and get it, against the rules. Running, she pushed off, her tether unbroken. At the first tier of maple limbs got assigned to my sister by father, and each girl, woman really, was jealous of each. Every sister wondered why she was assigned the worst limb, one unexpected to survive New England winters. Father knew trees and knew wood, yet heard the whispering and whining from his stripling daughters. How he laughed. He didn't understand this birth, this longing. The old man sees the cramp of time, bunched gingham, the women they will become, the children they will bear, bodies bulge like pears. He sees women as heartbeats of the world's ailments. Mama looked at me, her pleasure fractured like frilly underpants on a boy. Father berated Mama for not bearing sons, who would have accepted their gift and shrugged off the others. Each would have believed he won the lottery. I pumped hard to make a plan. Up high, clouds tickled my toes. Below, the ground grew dark. The wolves kept on pacing as pirates pulled out spyglasses, pointed them straight at me. Swinging was the closest thing to my soul. My ankle-socked feet pumped hard and piloted the wind, cauterized my ragged nerve endings like wine. I remember, too, the monkey bars, how air thumped and churned and drummed down through the canopy of trees. Walk, walk, walk. I dropped down to the hard-trod dirt, my knees kissing the earth so I could cover my ears and see the fast-approaching shadow. Apache. Mama stepped out and shielded her eyes and looked up. The helicopter disappeared, and I followed her gaze and spied air currents disturbing treetops a ridge distant. I saw it, treasure under waves of hawthorn, a blur of green, some specks of amber, ruby, the sapphire delphiniums. I almost jumped up to pluck the gems, but near the bench, pirates lurked with slinking wolves on leashes. I shut my eyes and saw the jewels, the castle wall. Back then, my magic could make it so. Back and forth, unattended, beaming, I swung, a little harder each time. We sailed. Mama used to say, our journey begins with a star compass of hope, a shark caught inside a jellyfish. This one is victim, that one is predator. Defying, then pushing off, I knew how to soar and hurl through space in a rush towards infinity, poised along the arc of memory of sister stars, scooped up with honeysuckle sticky fingers and dirty knees crusted with red dirt and creek gravel. This is the exquisite design of life. The strain, the push, the reach, the drift, the falter. We wheeled through life like lost Pleiades, shone, struggled to be seen, never noticed our radiance until the wood seat snapped in two and dropped us like stones. I'd been thinking of Father, how he used to push, make my feet touch the branches. Now I lay on my back, deciding if I should scream or cry, who might hear, and if they did, would I want them to? I noticed something high in the tree, what looked like a mummified head, dark holes for eyes, puckered mouth, an alto voice, I wondered, whose rang out, God's child, you are whole. I released the linked metal chain, so cold it burned. Grackles screeched, leaves skittered, branches snapped sharp, mown grass stink lift up my nostrils, cicadas scream louder than drill bits in steel hands. It hit my forearm. At this I did scream, short and high like a strangled goose, and I didn't care who heard. We sink on our own time, burnt in our daily clothes. We blow a flame for every cross, tuck bodies in tight bed sheets stained brown. Some call it a good burial, I call it convenience. This story is about a final daughter. This is about me and the wind cutting my body. My ending is the same each time. This is me thrusting air under feet. This is Mama watching me fall. As I rode, the wind, shotgun with my shoulders pulling, my hair flopping forward and back, Mama crease-folded her map of Missouri and looked at me. Remember, she stifled a yawn, your new name? Another gust pummeled the treetops. Yeah, I kept dragging my feet and watching the dust up whip away until I stopped. My right ked was dirtier than the left, and the wind still pushed me. Tell me, so I know you know. I pressed a thumb hard on my thigh, making a pale oval appear. Ruby. The wind pushed everything around me except the ants on the leg of that picnic table. Well, Mama smoothed the map and tucked it in her bag. What's Ruby want to know? I looked at the old metal slide and its ladder. Will there be a playground there?
Thank you so much for sharing that, April and Jolene and Heather. It's such a pleasure to share space with you, and thank you all for coming out on a Thursday afternoon. I know how busy you are, and it means a lot that there are people in the world who will come to these things, and it keeps us going, trust me. So my collection of short stories, it's my second collection. All of my work is rooted in the Carolinas. So born and raised in Charlotte, my people go way, way back. Like they came down from the mountains to work the textile mills far back. So if you haven't read my work or heard it, you're going to hear Carolina on every page. And during my interviews when the book came out in late 2021, someone said, "Is that accent real?" And I was like, would I make this up? I mean, like, so the nice thing about hearing it in the accent is now if you read it, you'll hear the accent. So this one is for my paternal grandmother, who I didn't realize until many, many years later and after her death that she also had PTSD, and this story I wrote for her. Lake Hartwell, South Carolina. It's past lunch hour and grandmother is still wearing her house coat. Tings and sprays bounce from the stovetop. A glimmer of steam gathers on her upper lip. Not sweat, mind you. Not sweat. The peonies on the fabric are wide and heavy pink, like they'd fall over if they were out in the side garden, as they always are during late April. But we are in July, and July is sweet and frayed, the grass only green down on the banks of the lake. Me and Juna played chicken on rafts all morning, our suits still damp when we put them on, hers only halfway up as we ran out the door, let it slam too hard, hearing grandmother say, "Watch my nerves, for Lord's sakes, my nerves." By the time we come in, we were striped, our torsos a wormy kind of white, our fingertips wrinkled, begging for fried squash and okra grandmother had in heaps by this point, for smushed up peaches meant for the ice cream churn, for teeth-cracking chunks of rock salt, that wayward bit of a watermelon seed, you know, that stringy bit you can't get down no matter how hard you try. So you wind up spitting the seeds on grandmother's floor, even though you wasn't supposed to be eating them in the house, because y'all know better, because she done told you twice to get your butts outside. And once you're outside, the men folks stand in a circle around their cache, taking stock of M80s and bottle rockets and whirling spiders and whistling Dixies, which was basically the same but hateful. So hateful you could feel it blow your cousin's pinky off, even though some grown-up yelled, "Fire in the hole!" And dumbass stood there in a sulfur fog like it was all happening to someone else. And next year, when you and Juna went in at lunch, you were practically teenagers and ate rolled-up honey ham cigars and chicken and a biscuit crackers, those buttery rectangles with that chemical chicken flavor, instead of spitting seeds on the floor, because now y'all were good girls, making sure to let grandmother lie down a while and have herself a little peace in the back room with the big box fan and a single bed and her thin yellow sheets. Oh, no.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. I am going to read a very short story, a micro called Simon. It is from this anthology called And If That Mockingbird Don't Sing. And I don't know if April knows this or not, but being part of this anthology and knowing the editor, Hannah Greco, it was how I got to meet April and other people in the writing community. Simon. Today he toddles between the aisles, from fresh fruits to canned vegetables, from spaghetti to cereal. Everyone gushes about how cute he is. Everyone smiles. His mother tries to keep up with his excitement and the compliments. He insists on carrying a box of Cheerios half of his height. She helps him get it into the red cart before he reaches up to her and says, "Hold you?" Pulling him tight, she sneaks in little kisses on his curves and carries him on her hip. He loves the snuggles, but they won't contain him for long. As soon as those tiny new Snickers touch the ground, he tries to run, then tumbles and falls. In the middle of the aisle, he notices his reflection on the tile. He beams as tiny hands clap. There is a twinkle in those big, beautiful eyes. A shopper helps him up. She says, "He's so cute." She probably asks his name too. Suddenly he feels shy and hides behind his mom. His head occasionally peeks at the strangers, those kind people who wave and smile. 12 years from now, he will meet his friends at his neighborhood park to play basketball. A lady walking her dog will call the cops to say, "There are people at the court who don't look like they live here." 20 years from now, the cops will pull him over at a traffic stop. The box of Cheerios sits still among the bags of groceries he has picked up on the way home. His mother, walking up and down the front porch, will call his phone with her long, trembling fingers over and over and over again. So, and then I'm reading also another flash. This one is a nonfiction. I write mostly nonfiction, and it's called When Home Is Not an Option. And it's this story when my husband, who's here, met my parents for the first time. Burning coals below, red atop the golden plate. The friendly cafe owner props the hookah next to us by the planters of mauve and red lilies. My mom nods her thank you. I whisper mine. You say merci, and with it, watch my parents beam in your sweet attempt to speak Farsi. Our Turkish host chimes in, Teşekkür. We flew across the oceans and over the seas, you and I, to meet my parents somewhere in between. I wanted you to experience a place akin to where I grew up, a city cloaked in honking horns and exhaust smoke, where drivers color outside the lines and dark brown eyes are framed with deep wrinkles of smiles. Winding the cobblestone path to the Galata Tower, we wander in and out of shops, talk into ancient walls, and practice our negotiation tactics. In the bazaar, you linger near the fragrant heaps of herbs and spice. I am drawn to the kaleidoscope of shawls and scarves. My fingertips run along the gleaming threads of silk. On a shelf next to the amber bracelets and opal rings, an orange tabby is soundly asleep. Ceiling fans lift the heat from our cheeks. The delicate fabrics dance. Blue and gold, sage and silver shimmer with the slightest breeze. We found our way to the water. Near the bridges across the Bosphorus, we settle in at a cafe hidden in a narrow alley, where old maple trees shelter the travelers and local passers-by. Between the Black and Marmara Sea, Europe and Asia, the four of us gather. We smoke hookah, drink from thin-waisted teacups, and savor little Turkish delights. My mom cuts into the flaky layers of baklava. Iranian baklava is better, I say. You disagree, but I can trace a faint smile in the depth of your blue eyes. My dad laughs, and you roll the dice. Bubbles form in the base, loud at first, but soon they fade into the clinking of teacups. The sound of checkers hitting the edges of the wood brings back memories long forgotten. The times my grandfather used to challenge my dad to a game of backgammon with a bit of bantering on the side. Hagia Sophia, with all its charm, awaits us somewhere beyond the street. I sip on the hot tea with a perfect note of cardamom and think, perhaps tomorrow. Today, I want to be in between.
Okay, so you know how people say, gosh, that's hard to follow? I mean, I have really hard to follow writers up here with me. So I'm going to attempt, I mean, that truly, I am just blown away by everyone here. It's so lovely to be with you. I am going to read from my first novel, which is called Maranatha Road. It is from Western North Carolina. Like Beth, I have long family roots in the Western North Carolina area. So like a lot of novelists, my first novel was set there, you know how it goes. Nobody from my family's really in these pages, but how that goes, yeah. Okay, so just to orient you, this book is about two women, Sadie Caswell, whose son dies shortly before his wedding, and Tinley Green, the young stranger who shows up claiming she's pregnant with his child. This first chapter, I'm not going to read the whole chapter, I'm just going to read a little snippet from it, is from Tinley Green's point of view. So she's a teenager when we meet her here. She's 16 years old. She and her parents live on a trailer on the land belonging to these people called the Hawtreys, Mr. and Mrs. Hawtrey. Tinley is concerned when we first meet her because her parents have gone out to run some errands the day before. A huge rainstorm has come in and they have not yet returned. And so she is waiting very anxiously for their return. So that's just to get you oriented as to where we are. I keep watch from the chicken shed where it's quiet and I can be by myself. I can still smell corn or seeds, something the chickens used to eat. There's no telling what might be watching me in the dark. Mice scratching in the dust or bats hanging upside down from the wooden beams. Even though there haven't been chickens here in a long time, everybody still calls it the chicken shed. Now there's only a dirt floor and rough wooden walls. Sometimes after Daddy washes Mr. Hawtrey's Buick with the hose, he parks it here to keep the birds off. But whenever Mr. Hawtrey drives it, he parks it outside by the house, and it gets dirty again before long. I press my finger into the bumps and lines on the wood, hundreds, thousands of splinters waiting to come apart. Through the rain, which refuses to let up, wheels crunch on the gravel driveway. I lean closer to the hole in the wall, my eyelashes brushing the wood. There's a flash of white, and in the curve, a long car appears. The back door of the house sticks, and somebody kicks it open. Mrs. Hawtrey comes out, wearing her brown raincoat, and looks toward the driveway. As the white car draws closer, I make out Mr. Stepp, with both hands on the steering wheel. Mrs. Hawtrey's brother, not Mr. Hawtrey, not my parents. I dig my fingernails into my arms, not understanding why Mr. Stepp has come or what it means. He pulls around to the side yard where the grass is worn down, parks, and swings his long legs out of the car. You shouldn't be out here in this mess, he calls out to Mrs. Hawtrey. What's going on, A.B.? Did you find him? Any sign one way or the other? Where's Tinley? He asks. She went outside a little bit ago, left her jacket, so Lord knows she's cold and probably wet too. I inch one of the shed doors open so I can hear them better. Mr. Stepp comes up to the porch. You want me to go look for her? What'd you find out? He shakes his head. I'd rather tell you both. No use saying it twice. She's old enough to hear it. Come on inside. She'll be here in a minute. Mrs. Hawtrey looks right at the shed. Better off waiting for the sheriff to get here anyway, Mr. Stepp says, and he disappears inside the house. When the sheriff's car rolls down the driveway a few seconds later, Mrs. Hawtrey calls for me, stretching out my name, the same way she calls her cat Calico if he hasn't shown up for breakfast. I push the door open, scraping the mud underneath until there's enough room to squeeze through.
These are just amazing. Oh my gosh. Thank you guys so much. I love that we were sharing from different kinds of writing, all of us. That's so cool. And too bad we didn't have some film that we could watch too, Naz's work. So I guess we're going to be asking each other questions, or do you have some questions for us?
Yeah. You guys want to talk about some themes, things like that?
Okay, great.
Or you can open up the questions to the audience.
So, did you have any questions in there? Because I have one in particular for everyone. So, as Beth was saying, this means so much to all of us whenever someone wants to read our work or wants to talk with us about our work, because it takes so long. It's such a solo act. And luckily, sometimes we can connect through social media or we can connect through classes with other writers. But for the most part, we're doing this on our own. And I'll speak for myself by saying the most of the time I'm saying, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. And so luckily, I've had friends that I could reach out to a lot and mentors that I could reach out to a lot to help. But I wanted to ask each of you sort of how you keep yourself going with what you're doing. And is there something that pushes you? And I'll start by just saying, for me, it took me a long time to figure out what the driving force was behind going when clearly I was getting rejection after rejection. After 450 rejections, I was still wanting to do it. And for me, when I especially was writing this collection in particular, my dad had just had a hemorrhagic stroke. he was bedbound, and I became one of 3 caregivers for him. And at the same time, my son was in kindergarten. And so I was really traversing this wild path and navigating my way through trying to figure out what it was like to see one man in my life dealing with becoming very vulnerable in ways he had never become vulnerable before, because he needed someone to take care of him all the time. And I was watching my son, who didn't really want me to take care of him as much anymore and wanted to kind of get on his own and become his own man. And so I really was, as you can see if you read the book, looking at a lot of the themes that men go through, especially men in my part of the world, where in rural areas, a lot of times there are stereotypes about men being violent or uncaring or too quiet or harsh or hard. And what I got to see with my husband, my son, and my dad was, and my brother for that matter, taking care of my dad, that there were so many tender moments that I wanted to capture so I didn't forget about them. So that was my driving force for this particular collection. And then a larger driving force for me was I want to talk about the people from my area and the way I know how to talk about them, because I don't like how other people are portraying the people from my area, the stereotypes and the caricatures. So anyone, I don't know where we want to start, but I would love to know what drives you, what do you, what pushes you? Either for this particular, either for right now or whatever.
Similar to you, I mean, building on the accent thing, my whole life, anytime I left the South, everyone assumes I'm stupid. And I say, okay, hold my beer. Let me show you how I'm not. And let me show you how most of us are not. Even my grandfather, who never learned to read and only finished, I think it was 4th grade, and then had to go work in the farm. They were sharecroppers on a very famous preacher man's land, still very famous family. But the stereotypes bother me. So I try to write against those. I try to be subversive in that way. But more than anything, writing is my coping mechanism. I had a not great childhood, as most writers didn't have a great childhood. I think that's how we wind up writers half the time. And it was the only place I felt safe speaking. And that's still true. So even when I have the 450 rejections, I got a brutal one last week on my new manuscript. I was like, oof, okay, well, this certainly keeps you humble. It's how I process the world. The further I get from writing, the worse my mental health gets. I mean, the Venn diagram is a circle. So that's, even when I want to quit, I can't. So that's pretty much it for me.
I guess I can just follow that, because everything that you said is true for me. So writing is how I process the word, but I took a long break. When I moved here and went to graduate school, I learned that, hey, I cannot write, even though I was a writer back at home, writing in Farsi. So it took a while, but I really missed it. And in 2020, when the pandemic happened, I just thought all the things that we're doing was not enough, teaching online and kids at home, homeschooling and all that. So I went back to grad school, and it gave me the confidence to write. But throughout all this time, I would say processing, it helps me process the word. Like if I would change it, one thing that if you ask me, I wouldn't change about the past 3 years is just getting back to writing. And then this time writing English. And then both of you said something about the stereotypes. So I write stories about home. And I really don't know when is the next time I can go home. And that kind of helps me on a personal level. That's how I cope, by missing home. And I'm hoping that what I write, it is different from what usually people see or hear from you. a little bit more real version of it that I have left.
I've been trying to think how to articulate my response. I didn't start writing until my daughter went to high school, so I was no longer taking her back and forth in school. I had some free time, and before then I'd been a technical writer, philosophical writer. Writing had always been part of my life, but not a creative writer. But I love to read, and it started off, I sort of just had this yin to create something, and I thought the novel was too big, so I thought I'll try the short story, and I never looked back, right? I still don't have anything of a lot of length. And of course, I started with my childhood in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. And in terms of what motivates me, when I think of, when I get that anxious feeling that I'm not writing enough, and I'm sure you all know what I mean, like it's a gathering period, the next thought is, I do think, why is I want my daughter to have this thing to hold when I'm gone. And it's that she doesn't know, really. She grew up in Connecticut, and she doesn't know about so much about our family in Tennessee. And like I was ironing today and thinking, Shay doesn't know about the hours my sister and I spent with my grandmother ironing over a lifetime. And so it's things like that. I sort of see making these stories as giving my daughter her history. And then I also think that there's some stories I do that, well, they're for other people and people going through other things. So and like you were saying, Beth, if I'm not writing, I'm going to school right now in a totally different non-writing environment, so not writing has been really getting me down. So I'm writing a lot in my head. But yeah, so.
Hey, that counts.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Very similar. I don't, I was nodding as everybody was sharing their answer because I feel the same. So I wrote short stories for a long time. I still write short stories, but I'll talk about the inspiration behind the novels real quick. So Maranatha Road is my first one. It came out in 2017, and so the town in Maranatha Road is called Garnet, and it is an amalgamation of Hendersonville, which is where I'm from, and then the more rural areas of Tuxedo, Zirconia, and the Green River area. I see some people nodding. That's where my grandparents, great-grandparents, et cetera, are from. And so I kind of combined those rural areas with sort of the cute, apple orchards, charm, et cetera, of Hendersonville. But what I want to share is, there is a lot of my personal background in this story too, because I think especially with early works, but really it keeps coming up because it's, again, how we process things. So when I was actually telling Maureen about this earlier, when I was a teenager, so 10, 16 when we start this book, my mother got leukemia, and my sister and I spent some time in our grandparents' farm in Hendersonville that had an old chicken shed, and we were fascinated but also terrified by that chicken shed. Like, it was just such a weird, place. Like, rusty tools on the wall. I mean, it was just strange. So anyway, we waited, not in the same way Tilly did, but we waited, right, at our grandparents' house for news about our mother and what was going to happen to her. And so that, that's part of it. And then the Good Luck Stone is totally different. It's a dual timeline, World War II in the Philippines and 2010 Savannah, Georgia. So not as much personal there, but my mother-in-law lives in Savannah, and whenever I'm there, I don't know how many of y'all been to, like Charleston, where Beth lives, Savannah, like all those kind of places. I would walk around and I'd see these beautiful mansions, and first of all, I think, who lives there? Right? Who lives in this house? But then I also thought, well, what if somebody is this very wealthy, very esteemed society person, and she lives in one of these mansions, but her whole present day life is built on a lie, on a secret. And so what would happen if that began to unravel? So that's where that one came from.
So I mean, we can open it up to you guys if you have questions, but I have more questions too. So, but does anyone? I know there are some writers in the room. Is there anyone have any questions? Go ahead.
Well, years ago, the Indie, which is a local rag, ran a feature about how artists live their day life and sometimes their day job and make time. And the thing is, you just don't have an option. You have to do it. I mean, you just work it out. And I have to say that it's really, personally, I love to read because I only have this one life, but I get to get all of your lives if I read about them.
Oh, thank you.
I forget who said it, but something that always stuck with me, both as a reader and a writer, is reading is the closest thing you can get to inhabiting someone else's consciousness. And I just think that's the most beautiful thing. It's magical.
Yeah, and the thing that's troublesome sometimes about that is that I know in my book, like I think I have over 50 working class jobs mentioned. And what had occurred to me way early on was that most of my friends that I graduated with from high school, most of the people that I grew up around, work, really long hours. Whether they're nurses or they're coal miners or they're over-the-road truckers or they're, the vet. I mean, they're working 16-hour days. Mm-hmm. How do you come home from that and have time to write something? And I didn't think I'd ever be able to have the time to write. And then I started thinking, well, wait, if I don't write, and I'm from a working class upbringing, who's writing all the books we're reading? Mm-hmm. If I don't write the books or the stories, and if I don't try to help other people that are working class writers find the time to write and help to give them some ideas about how you can do that, then we're going to lose a whole faction of people in our books that are on our shelves. So I know for me, like people would ask, how do you find the time to write? Well, 25 minutes at a time, the Pomodoro clock goes on, mm-hmm. and I sit and I write. You can get a lot done in a very short period of time, and then it's a cumulative effect. Well, it took me a long time to get books written, but still, I just think that I hope people that are out there thinking there's not enough time to write because they're working too many hours will still take the time to write something and really consider how much we need that. That worries me, even more so now than it ever did before.
I feel like a lot of times people feel like, oh, I need the comfy chair and the really nice smelling candle and, a big block of time. And it's just not the reality for most of us, right? We're writing
like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're writing in airports and the back of cabs and in carpool line and, not when we're driving, but.
Sure.
Yeah.
I did a memo. I recorded
stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, I record notes all. Yeah, that's true. Any other questions? So one of the other questions I had for you all is, when you can't write, what do you do? And I'll start by saying, I get so many ideas when I'm weeding the garden. So when I read Deadheading on her title of her book, I was like, oh, and then I was reading, and the flowers were in there. Anyway, I can do a lot when I'm weeding. So what do you guys? Give me some ideas.
You can come to my house and get all the ideas.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah. That's what I should do.
I love to cook and bake and knit, and I really can sort of get into a flow zone, but I'm thinking about writing when I'm doing it.
Cooking for me is a good one, and also walking. I walk about an hour every day. The manuscript I just finished, I lived in Kentucky for about 2 years during the height of the pandemic, and I didn't realize when I rented my little 120-year-old shotgun house that it was only a mile from the Ohio River. So I took that walk every day, and I walked across what used to be a railroad bridge from Louisville, Kentucky to Jeffersonville, Indiana. So every day I walked to Indiana. It sounds like a long way. It was 2 miles, so it wasn't that far. But that whole book is essentially a document of the walks. So hopefully fewer brutal rejections follow, and maybe one nice acceptance and publication. But yeah, I can't. I do so much of my writing actually walking. So when I sit down, it tends to just flow out.
I worry that I cannot write again, I suppose, when I cannot write. But it's kind of a few things. When I'm busy, actually, it's kind of interesting that I have a lot to do, a lot of grading, and guests are coming over, things like that. That's when I think I get calm enough that I start thinking. So I do, similar to what you're saying, writing off the page rather when you're doing other things. There are some times that I do cleaning. Actually, Gabe says, "What's happening? What is due? Is something going on?" Because you're cleaning the closet again. So what are you avoiding? But really, that's
procrastinating.
So that's how I avoid. But at the same time, try to get myself there. And reading other people's work really help.
It's a problem being down on this end. I'm like, yes. So not cooking for me. I'm not a cook. I'm really not good at cooking. So if anybody wants to come to my house and cook, but the same otherwise, right? Like I walk my dog. I solve a lot of, or I think I do solve a lot of plot problems walking the dog. And then I was going to say reading also, because that's the fail safe for me, right? If I'm just feeling completely tapped out or uninspired, all I have to do is pick up the book and I'm just right back into it. I mean, it sounds cheesy to say like, oh, it inspires me, but it really does.
Yeah.
Well, and other art forms too, like you said. Visual art is a big one for me. Music is a big one for me. I grew up with a musician.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, music, if I can't write a scene, I'll listen to some music to get myself into it. But it's interesting that you brought up that inspiration of other people's writing. So that was actually going to be my next question, and I'll start down there with you since we can. But who are you inspired by? Who are the most inspiring writers of any form or artists of any form?
Oh, that's a great question. So present company, of course, first, right, and then I would say, so I really like Ron Rash. I mean, I think he's just thinking him. It's just hard to go wrong with Ron Rash. I really like Ann Patchett. I really like Elizabeth Strout. I really like Mary Beth Keane. Gosh, there's so many, but those are some that immediately come to mind.
One of those questions I have to think about.
Yeah.
But before actually coming here, I think for a long time, what got me interested in writing was Milan Kundera, who just actually passed away. So I read a lot of his books, translation of it in Farsi, and also Margaret Duras is one of my favorite writers. I think they got me into reading more and be interested in trying to write.
I love anything Southern Gothic, anything Gothic at all. So, going back to the Brits and beyond. I'm having a Shirley Jackson summer. I've been rereading all of her books, and she's just a mad genius, and I love it.
Gosh, and so there are thousands of writers.
You can't possibly answer. So today,
How about right
today,
now?
you're
Well,
right
I'd
now.
say, yeah, actually, when I was looking for Beth's book on my shelf, which is a haphazard shelf right now, I noticed a lot of Jeanette Winterson's books. She's someone that I've been inspired by and just wowed by since I was young, in my 20s. I was thinking about Ron Rash right when you said his name. And most these days, anthologies, because I get to read, the best of small fictions or the best American essays. I mean, because just reading all the anthologies is just rich with people.
And speaking of which, April's putting together an
Oh, that's
amazing
right.
anthology called Flair. Tell them about
Oh,
it.
it's a collection of flash on chronic illness, and I just really left it open for the writers to determine what chronic illness was for them. So I get mostly it's creative nonfiction, but there is some fiction, which I'm very happy about. And so, I've got to get that manuscript off to the publisher soon. I think that's what internally I'm just hiding, you know.
So what big cooking project are you gonna do with?
Yeah, be like a banquet, right?
Yeah.
We'll have you cook for us so that gets done. Yeah. So this is my question, and I'm trying to think. So for today,
Well,
for me,
I read your stuff to get inspired. I do. I know why. Yeah.
For me, I guess probably. I mean, Dorothy Allison. Like,
I remember when I bought it.
yeah, I can't.
I was in college.
Yeah, it changed everything for me. Probably Best South Carolina.
Amazing.
Annie Proulx, same thing. You know, Louise Erdrich. There are so many, but Ron Rash I absolutely love. Yeah, and I think that for me though, lately my big thing has been going through getting a book published. You realize how many amazing writers are not published. And especially even the people that are published but are published by very, very small presses that then go out of print or go defunct. I've been picking up chapbooks left and right, and I am reading them saying, what is wrong with the big houses that they're not finding these people? But anyway, so those are very inspiring to me, and I just, chapbooks are just amazing.
Have you read Rebecca Lee?
No.
Oh, you've got to try.
I need to.
She's a Carolina writer, I believe. She's at the she's at UNC Wilmington. That's
Very good.
For all I know, she's got another one out.
Claire Beams is another North Carolina writer that's mad genius.
Yeah, and we love her in Pittsburgh. I don't know. Oh my gosh, what would we do without her? Chelsea Beaker writes short stories from Central Valley of California, and I think for me lately, another thing I've been trying to do is look at people who are writing from their actual areas, you know, just to kind of see, because in the past, I remember I took a class years and years ago, and one of the people that was taught in that class was Sarah Orne Jewett, and my professor, if you would say, oh, I'm reading regional writers, she hated to hear that, because it seemed as though at the time, when someone called a writer a regional writer, it was not a compliment. It was saying, you know, you can't, especially female regional writers. And Faulkner, people would say that about him, but even so, that seemed to be like something that wasn't to be celebrated, and so she had a real problem with that. And that's never left my head, you know, and I'm hoping that we've moved on from that, because I look at people who are writing regional writing, and whether you're writing about North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, New York, upstate New York, Central Valley, the whole point is that you're showing people that we're all more alike than we are different. And so regional writers really are universal writers in so many ways. So, because I was worried a little bit about that. You know, I thought, oh, well, people only from Western PA want to read a book about Western PA, but what I've been finding out is I just had a note from someone in Ireland. I was like, oh, this reminds me of where I live. You know, like, so I think that that's another thing that we don't realize that, you know, that might be it might have been a downside at one time, but now regional writers are definitely not that, I don't think. Any other questions from anyone? Or any of you guys have questions for anyone? Okay. So any closing words from anyone? Okay, I'm going to do something that's going to embarrass my husband, but I have to do it because I've gone through this whole book tour and I've never read anything specifically to him. So I'm going to read a very short micro that was published in Prairie Schooner, and it's called Handful of Throttle. I met my husband when I was 15 years old, and he was a motocross champion, and so this is a micro that I wrote about him. Handful of Throttle. He didn't just hit that jump fourth gear pinned, he sailed. Bits of earth spinning off those knobbies. I thought he'd plummet back down, That's when the trees leaned in and the clouds fell from the sky a little, coming in closer to see how a man on a Yamaha could wing like a hawk. They tapped the top of his helmet with their storm-filled palms and then buoyed him milliseconds more. And I waited there, ground-bound, knees wanting to give out, scared even to kick the starter of the bike beside me, scared even to lift my leg over the seat and mount something so wild, knowing I'd fall over at the first blush of crash. When he landed it, he took off again, the motor yammering, hammering the turn, sinking the front tire into the lonely berm. He glanced back to see if I was still there, if I'd been struck by the roost of his trailing dirt. I hit the button and let the shutter open again. It's all I could do. And I just want to close by saying thank you all for coming, and thank you all for supporting. Hopefully you'll get an opportunity at some point in your lives to support other artists or support your own self as an artist. And thank you so much to April, who has been an amazing support to me for years. I don't know what I would do without you. I don't know. I really don't. I text her at all times of the night to get advice. And so anyway, and thank you so much. It's been just an honor and pleasure to read with all of you. And
Thank you.
I can't thank you all enough. So.
I'm really impressed you chose well.